All right, well, welcome to Equip. Really appreciate your willingness to be here to spend time together this morning. We are going to continue this series, which is called Partners in Peace. We've been looking at the first week of the series. We looked at 1 Corinthians chapter 13, again, commonly referred to as the love chapter in Scripture. And we do find detailed there a description of what biblical love looks like, what it is, what it isn't. And I think it's probably clear to most of us after that discussion, and perhaps in your own experience, that biblical love sets the bar pretty high. It's really difficult to achieve that kind of love, at least all the time, right? Consistently. There are always challenges to it. So for most of us, if we want to grow into loving others as the Bible teaches that we should, we have to keep changing and keep growing and keep working at it. That's the reality. Last week, we outlined a process that can help us to sort of plan for and engage in that growth, really what it looks like to grow within ourselves with Scripture as our guide, with God's Word leading us, committing to a plan and doing the hard work and relying on God and trusting on others to help us and actually being conscious of change that's happening over time so we know whether we're on the right track or not. We can see that change happening. This morning, as we prepare for today's session, which is entitled Teamwork Makes the Dream Work, I mentioned that last week, we're going to talk more about what it looks like to sort of rearrange the conflict table so that we're working together instead of working against each other. But before we do that, I just want to start with a passage in Scripture. This is James chapter 4, verses 1 through 3. What causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? You desire and you do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. You ask and you do not receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions. Really interesting passage that really puts the finger on the problem. The problem is within ourselves we're conflicted. We want things that we can't have, or we want the wrong things and are frustrated when we can't get them, and we're willing to do crazy things, even jeopardize or destroy relationships in order to get what we want or what we need. And that's the reality that we see showing up in all of our relationships from time to time. It really is that simple. So today we're going to talk about, okay, we've looked at this biblical picture of love. We understand that it's supposed to be sacrificial. It's supposed to be giving. It's supposed to be understanding. It's supposed to be patient. It's supposed to be kind. It's not supposed to keep records of wrong. All the things that we tend to do when our relationships get in trouble, we're doing the opposites of those things. And so we've talked about how we can begin to change those areas within us. Worked on that last week. So you get to the point where, okay, I'm willing. Right? I'm willing and I desire to bring a conflict situation to some kind of peace. But how in the world do I do that? And that's what we're going to talk about this morning. We're going to look at a practical approach to handling conflict in our marriages and our other important relationships. Again, speaking of other relationships, I've tried to emphasize in the last 2 weeks that while we are focusing on marriage, where all these things have a place in marriage and working on our marriages, most of these principles are transferable. They can be used with really any other relationship as well. So to that end, we're going to look at a process for engaging conflict with an eye toward finding agreement. Before we dive in, though, I just want to make our time together this morning maybe a little bit easier to understand or to build upon going forward in the future. So in order to accomplish that, make sure we're all on the same page, I want to look at a little bit of vocabulary with you first. That's going to be on the first page of your handout on the front side. And I know that we're all big kids here. We all have the ability, by the grace of God, to learn and to grow and to handle language and learn things. So maybe it sounds like vocabulary is a little bit beneath us. But the unique thing about the words that we use is that there is oftentimes a thought pattern or a strategy behind the words that we choose. I think a great example comes out in politics. So I hate to bring this up even up here, but I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway, because the illustration is good. And I'm not telling you how you should believe or what you should think about politics. That's not what this morning is all about. But by virtue of just sort of popcorn shouting out answers, when I use the word liberal, what do you think of? Okay, fair enough. Attaching it to a party, Democrats. Anybody else? Again, no judgment here. But what do you think of when you hear the word liberal? Insanity. Okay, so we have strong emotional feelings toward other perspectives. Gotcha. Okay. All right. Progressive. Okay. What was that? I'm sorry. Open to anything. Okay. Big government. Okay. All right, so generally, let me ask for a show of hands, and we won't be able to see this on the video, but I'll try and capture in words what we're seeing here. How many of you feel, and this is again not revealing your own perspective, but how many of you feel that when that word is used, it's most often used positively? No hands. Okay. How many of you feel it's most often used negatively? Most or all of the hands. Okay. Great. So we've established that to a large degree, your sense is that the word liberal is used negatively. Now, let me ask you this. How do you interpret that word, or how do you feel about it when I use it this way in a sentence? The waitress applied the hot fudge liberally to my sundae. You have mixed feelings? I got you. Love-hate relationship with hot fudge. Love the hot fudge, hate what it does, maybe? Okay, fair enough. Does that make sense? I mean, so we use words differently in different contexts. So I want to make sure we're all on the same page with vocabulary this morning, so that we're understanding as we speak sort of what the intent is. So here we go. I want to go over these terms with you because we need to have that common understanding. So if you look at page 1 of your sheet, you'll see the word conflict. And again, the way we'll define that for the purposes of this morning's discussion is really just the state of disagreement or the disagreement itself. You might be in conflict, or you might be in a conflict. Sometimes we describe our situation in general, and sometimes we deal with it specifically. But either way, it's a state of disagreement. The word party, which I think is usually a fun word. Party, yay, party. In this case, party is an individual or an entity who has both an interest and agency in a conflict. Has both an interest and agency. Let's talk about those two words. Interest. An interest means that you have a stake in how a particular conflict is resolved. You have a particular stake in how a conflict is resolved. You care about it, and you stand to gain or lose something from the way that conflict is resolved. Agency is the condition of being in action, or the means or mode of acting. And so in a conflict situation, when we use this term, we are describing somebody who has decision-making capacity or ability. They're at the table. How this whole thing turns out depends on them somehow. They have the ability to be an agent in that conflict. That's agency. Conflict resolution. How many of you have heard that term used, conflict resolution? It's a very common term. Yep, lots of you. Very common term. The use of a process to bring an end to conflict, and I would add to the complete satisfaction of all parties. All right, that would be conflict resolution. However, what I would submit to you is that resolution, or an end to conflict, it sounds beautiful. It sounds like the best possible outcome, and it may very well be. But I would add, in reality, that any movement toward resolution, even if it's not ultimate resolution itself, is a positive thing. It's a good thing. So I prefer to talk more about conflict engagement. What are we doing to take on the conflict situation, rather than are we only going to judge this a success if we're able to completely resolve this conflict? So you'll hear me talk more about conflict engagement than conflict resolution. Next, I think it's really important to be aware of the reality of bias. And bias is very simply this: a tendency or inclination that can lead to unfair or prejudicial judgments. Okay, it can lead, doesn't always have to lead. You might be biased in a certain direction, and you're absolutely right, factually. But there are times when we are biased in a certain way, and it can lead us sort of to making prejudicial or unfair judgments, and that can really harm a conversation. And so just be conscious of a few forms of bias in particular. These that we're going to go over will influence how you and others receive and process the information that you'll come across in a conflict situation, and really throughout your whole life. So there's really 4 kinds I want to talk about this morning. The first is confirmation bias. And again, you don't have to remember all of these terms to be able to effectively navigate conflict. It's just good to be aware that these things exist, that they're a reality within us, and that they are within other people too. And in some cases, they're just a natural response to how we've been raised, or how we live, or decisions we've made, or perhaps our faith, or perhaps our politics. There's lots of things that influence these biases. So first one is confirmation bias. This is a tendency to favor information that confirms our existing beliefs. This is very common because it's comfortable. You're in a situation that's difficult. You've made an assumption about somebody or something. There's behavior or something that happens that reinforces that assumption that you've made. And what you get to say at the end of that is, I knew it. In other words, I'm right. And not even from the perspective of I'm proud at how right I am. It's comforting to be right, to be correct. It's uncomfortable for many people to be incorrect in a situation. It's comfortable for us to be correct. So we tend to have this confirmation bias. We favor information that confirms what we already believe. All women are unreasonable. After all, I've had a specific experience with many. So therefore, all must be. Well, all aren't. And not even the ones that I've had situations with are all the time, probably. And probably not any more so than the men that I've talked with. But just an example that sometimes we look for confirmation of what we already believe. And so there's some bias there. We're going into a discussion or a situation already looking for a particular outcome. Not asking questions, we've already got answers in our mind. And it's not a healthy or productive way to start out engaging a conflict situation. Confirmation bias. Anchoring bias is a second one, relying too heavily on the first piece of information encountered in a conflict situation, particularly when we're making decisions. I'll give you a little bit of an illustration to help you out with this one. When I was a teenager, gas for my car cost about $1 a gallon, as I recall. I think when I started driving, it was 97 cents or something like that. Gas now costs just under $3 per gallon here. And so based on that, gas is ridiculously expensive. It's gone up a lot. It's ridiculously expensive, almost out of reach, okay? Based on that 97-cent price tag that I recall from a few years ago. Now, why is this form of bias a problem? Well, because it isn't consistent or predictable. Doesn't help us recognize patterns, doesn't help us get accurate information, doesn't help us with anything. And how do I know that? Because, as I recall, we were living in Alaska in 2008. There was, as you recall, a nationwide financial crisis, a couple different housing and banking and all kinds of different types of agencies involved. But there was a crisis going on, and because of that, gas for my car in 2008 was $5 per gallon where we were living. Well, now it's just under $3 a gallon. It's cheap. Less than half of what we used to pay for it, right? So which is it? Is it expensive or is it cheap? Well, it depends on your perspective. So if you allow anchoring bias to enter the equation, it's really unpredictable and difficult. Very likely our anchor and the anchors of the other people that we are in conflict with are different. And if we rely too heavily on that reference data from some time ago in a different place, we'll find it really difficult to come to a common agreement. So be aware of that kind. Affinity bias, this is one of my personal favorites. Preference for individuals who are similar to you. So this is a tendency to defend your family and your country, your ethnicity, your church, your gender, etc., because they're similar to you. Now, the reverse is also true with affinity bias. We are likely to look less favorably on those who are different from us. So here's how this plays out. If you were to see, let me come up with a good example for you here. If you were to see somebody on the news who stole their groceries, for instance, I'll throw an example out there. Stole their groceries from the grocery store. They were arrested. They were being prosecuted. If you are somebody of limited means and you're struggling to get by, and you are like this other person, you can identify with them, you are very likely to look at them and say, wow, they're probably just trying to feed their family. They're desperate. They're trying to feed their family. If you're not like that other person, if you are of unlimited means and you are looking down on somebody in that situation, very easy to say, good, get another criminal off the streets, right? Very different perspectives of the same situation because we have this tendency to have an affinity for people who are like us. It's important to be conscious of that when we're in disagreements with other people. And it's funny, even in marriage, yes, this is your partner. This is the person that you believe God created for you, for this time and place, for you to come together as one. Still two very different people in most cases, right? So it's easy to get in our frustration to look at other people and say, yeah, they're not like me, so therefore what they did is bad. Or they are like me, so therefore what they did probably has a totally logical explanation, okay? That's affinity bias. Lastly, group attribution bias. This is the assumption that every person in a group is just like every other person in that group. This is you men are all the same, or, well, that's Protestants for you, or all accountants are boring. Do we have any accountants in the room? All accountants are boring. You get the picture. Not necessarily accurate, but our tendency to sort of group people together. And when we find out what group they're from, we already have assumptions in our mind about them. That's group attribution bias. Again, just really important to be aware that we can tend to already have preconceived notions about people before we even engage in a conflict situation. And if we can get a grip on that and learn to deal with that, we can have much more effective, much more amenable conversations. All right, the next term is team. This is two or more parties who are committed to working together to accomplish a given task or objective. The idea of teamwork. That's probably not a new one for you, but we'll talk a little bit about what teamwork looks like as we continue on here. And there are some, just so that you're aware, I think your sheet says this, my notes don't, but you have an asterisk by some of these terms. Those are terms we'll use as we're going through the conflict outline that we're about to go through. There are some other terms that are not necessarily in there, they're just bonus terms, but they do not have asterisks by them, so I just think they're handy to have. One of them is reframing. Reframing is limiting the impact of a negative thought by intentionally changing your perspective. I'd love to have a visual example up on stage here for you. I don't have one here, but think of it this way. Think of a scene in front of you, but you're looking at the scene through a little tiny picture frame. In this picture frame, you see flames and you see smoke. All right? Flames and smoke. And you're looking through that going, man, there's a fire someplace. People are it could be people are in danger. It could be a building burning down. It could be all I see is flames and smoke. But a lot of times, flames and smoke are not good. Okay, that's your frame at the moment. When we reframe or help people to reframe, we encourage them to take a step back and change the size and scope of that frame that they're looking through at the picture behind it. Could be that is somebody's fifth generation home burning down to the ground. Could also be that that's a campfire on a beautiful summer evening. Okay? So if people are feeling negative and you can help them to change their perspective a little bit, sometimes you can take what they're looking at as a negative and help them to see the positives. That can go a long way as we help people to sort of work through conflict and as you yourself work through it. So that's reframing. You'll hear me talk about the pie once or twice. The pie is just another term used to sort of illustrate, it's a metaphor, used to illustrate the idea of a solution. And the pie makes a great illustration for a solution because you can slice that pie up and divvy it up into different size pieces, right? Probably happens at Thanksgiving. I remember times where the pie gets handed out and I'm like, where's the rest of the pie? Pie can be cut into different size pieces. We'll also talk about enlarging the pie. It's a little bit counterintuitive, but we can actually take that pie and we can make that pie bigger in some cases, and we'll talk about that. But when we talk about the pie, it's just another way of talking about a solution. Zopa, which sounds like the world's most exciting and fun Greek word, Zopa. Not only is it not fun, it's not a Greek word at all. So Zopa is an acronym that stands for Zone of Possible Agreement, and technically it is fun, I think, from my perspective. Zone of Possible Agreement. This is the range of potential solutions to a disagreement in which the parties may be able to establish some common ground. So when I help people work through conflict, I try to identify this zone of possible agreement. Here's what it looks like. A baseball player is being courted by a professional baseball team, right? The agents are talking. And the baseball player has decided in advance that they are willing to accept $750,000 to $1 million a year as a starting salary, okay? $750,000 to $1 million, that's their zone. The team is willing to pay $600,000 to $800,000. That's their zone. The area where those overlap, which is $750,000 to $800,000, that's the zone that they're both willing to offer or accept. That's the zone of possible agreement. So as you think about conflict, it's really good to identify where people are at in their expectations or their needs or their wants or their hopes or their dreams, because it helps you to find places that you can agree on. So that's a zone of possible agreement. It's good to have that in mind. We're almost done here with the vocabulary. Impasse is just a point at which the parties are locked in disagreement and they can't move forward any further toward agreement. That's an impasse. And lastly, option building and generation. This is where we get together and we brainstorm. We just brainstorm and we think creatively to construct the terms of an agreement that could satisfy some or all of the parties' interests, what they're looking for, what they want. Okay? So those are a few of the terms that we'll use as we kind of work through this process. But for the remainder of our time, what I want to work through with you is an outline that you have on the flip side of your sheet. And here's why. When faced with conflict, there are a number of steps that we can follow that when we work through those, help us to gain traction and gain ground on conflict. And the order of these steps is important. So I want to just say this. You might have found yourself in conflict with someone in the past, or you may even be in conflict with somebody right now, and you're kind of flailing around saying, okay, I just heard you talk about this term impasse. That's where we are. We're at an impasse. We can't move any further. And so I just want to put this in your head. If you're at an impasse, in other words, by all appearances, there's no solution in front of you, it's not because the parties can't find a way to engage it. Most likely, it is because they won't find a way to engage it. What we are willing to do, whether we are willing to participate, whether we're willing to collaborate, it really does boil down to that. I talk with people with some frequency who are fighting with each other or struggling with in relationships, and most often there is a sense of offense or a sense of being wronged or a sense of unfairness or something that people latch onto, and they don't say, I can't take another step further. They say, I won't take another step further. So we need to get to the point where we break that up, and we help people to say, okay, what does it look like to set that aside and to consider options? And so this process really is designed to get us in a mindset, not just to walk us through a mechanical process, but to get us in a mindset, to get us to check our hearts at the door, to apply all the scriptures that we've already talked about, again, to sort of work through conflict. The outline that I've given you doesn't have scriptures written in it. And the reason that I didn't put scripture in this outline, we've covered a lot of that in the last 2 weeks, and even a passage this morning that makes it clear where conflict comes from. The reason is because you very likely have non-believing friends or family. And I want you to be able to apply this outline to those relationships as well without bringing up what the Bible says, because to some people, they'll say, so what? Who cares if that's what the Bible says? So it's important to us, and it shapes the why and the how we do things. Our relationship with Jesus and the example that he set and the kind of love that the Bible calls for, that has to shape who we are and what we do. But that's not true for everybody. So I want to give you a tool that you can use with anybody, anywhere, anytime. And so let's go through this outline. All right, so as you are approaching a conflict situation and you're trying to figure out how to navigate this and how to negotiate this, these are just some simple steps that, again, this isn't everything that I would recommend. If I were to sit down with you, I'd have different suggestions for your specific situation. The Bible may address your specific situations as you try to absorb Scripture and apply it to your lives. It might look different in your conflict situation than somebody else's because of the specifics or because of who's involved. But this is a good starting point, this outline, I would say. So the first thing I would want to do is to identify all legitimately interested parties. Again, we talked about that term party. This is somebody who has interest and agency in a conflict. Invite them to collaborate. Right? Even in our marriages, oftentimes it's you did this, or you frustrated me because of this, and you did this, and the next thing that happens is this. And that's where the conversation ends. But an invitation to collaborate, hey, can we talk about this? I want to hear you. I want to understand where you're coming from. Can we talk about this? An invitation to collaborate is a really good first start. Now, I would note that not everybody is a party. There are times when, let me just pull out my other sheet here. There are times when there are people who are involved or feel like they're involved in a discussion who need to not be there. In marriage, this happens, I would argue, while our parents are formative in our lives. Scripture is very clear in the requirement or the obligation or the directive to leave and cleave. There is a new family that is created at the time of that marriage. And yes, if we're wise, we will listen to the advice of people who are seasoned, who care about us and love us. But there are times when parents or other family members cause problems or perpetuate problems in those situations. And it's important that you just limit your discussions to the people who actually have an interest and the ability to make a decision. Get those folks around the table. Not everybody's a party. Disinterested family members, again, are not parties, although they might be very influential. Just good to remember that. Also, bystanders who are offended are not parties. Boy, in our culture today, how far do you have to go to find somebody who's offended about something? They're everywhere. And just because somebody's offended doesn't mean that they have an interest in a situation. In fact, it's funny. I like to watch reels on social media. There's little videos on social media once in a while, and they're great for bringing out the people at the demonstrations with their signs, yelling and shouting. And then somebody stops and asks them a question: "How has this impacted you?" And they're like, "Well, I mean, it hasn't impacted me directly, but I'm sure I know somebody who's been impacted." Okay, you're standing out on a beautiful afternoon, and you're demonstrating, and you're shouting, and you're yelling, and kicking up a dust, and you're being filmed, and which to me would say this is probably important to you. And so many people can't articulate why something is important to them. So not every bystander who is offended by something is a party. Also, when we're in conflict situations, there's times where advocates might be present. Somebody else who does have a seat at the table has brought along with them, either for emotional support or encouragement or advice. Great, that can be super helpful, but can also be really difficult. So just be aware they are there for those purposes, for emotional support or for advice. I think about. I did a lot of work with the state of Minnesota Department of Education, doing mediation in special education environments in the schools. It's times where special ed families have kids in special ed, where they are very frustrated with the way the schools are doing something, or vice versa. Schools are saying, "Hey, the family is making our life more difficult. We're trying to teach their child, and they're getting in the way." Either way, there's a conflict. And myself and at the time 11 other mediators would go into those situations and try to help people straighten those situations out. And in many cases, the families would bring in an advocate. And there are times where the advocate does a great job of, when the family's feeling really emotional, the advocate's not as connected to the situation. It's not their child. So they're able to be really helpful and help kind of organize thoughts and make things clear and lay things out. Super good, right? Really good. There's times when you're having conversations, maybe even lawyers are in the room, and their job is to give you advice, but not necessarily, it's not their fight. In court, they're there to have a more active role, but there's times in other environments where you might have them present. They shouldn't have an active role. They should be there for support. So we only want to identify the interested parties and make sure that we invite them to collaborate. In a marriage situation, that's probably you and your spouse, right? Oftentimes it's going to be limited to that. Number 2, I always recommend this. Early on in the process, this is really about forming a team, right? But we do something that I mentioned last week. We call it rearranging the table. Think about sitting around a table when you're fighting with somebody. All right, we got to sit down and talk about this. Okay, so you sit down at the table, and one of you sits on one side, and the other one sits on the other side, and you shout back and forth. And in your mind, the problem is that other person. But in reality, the other person is experiencing the problem just like you are. You're both in the same uncomfortable situation of having to fight over something you can't control. Think about that for a minute. Let that sink in. You're both at a table because you have to. Because the other person has to give you something before you can get what you need or want. You're both in the same uncomfortable situation. You're shouting at each other, trying to get something that you can't get without their help. And they're trying to get something that they can't get without your help. You're both in the same uncomfortable situation. How much more effective would it be if in our mind we sort of create an image of this problem and we move the problem over to one side of the table, but we move the people around to the same side of the table? Now it's a team. And your job is to work together to figure out how to conquer that problem on the other side of the table. That's rearranging the table. And I like to think about it in terms of that way, because once people get that in their minds and they begin to create habits with rearranging the table, arguments and discussions give way to constructive conversations. And if you can't achieve an objective, it's because the two of you together don't have the means of achieving it, which is far better than one of you holding out on the other one, right? So rearrange the table. I think about an Aesop's fable when I think about this. There's an Aesop's fable, which always, of course, had a moral attached to them. There's one called The Lion and the Boar. And here's the story. A lion and a boar were fighting over a drinking hole, a little watering hole, so they could get water to survive. If they didn't get water, they'd die. So they're fighting, and it's violent, and the lion is swatting at the boar, and the boar is, moving those big tusks trying to spear the lion, and they're fighting, and they're gripped in this battle. And while they're fighting, they both glance over, and they see vultures circling. And they realize one of us is going to get a drink of water, and the other one's going to be lunch. So they stop, and they have a conversation, and the boar says to the lion, "What are we doing? Did you see the vultures?" And the lion said, "Yeah, I see the vultures." This dialogue, by the way, is something I added in. This isn't part of the original fable, but this is how I imagine the conversation going. What are they waiting for? Well, they're waiting to see which one of us is going to be lunch. Well, what are our chances? Oh, right now we're 50-50, right? We're embroiled in conflict, and we both have each other by the throats. One of us isn't going to make it, but we don't know which one. We got a 50-50 chance. And so they decide, rather, to cooperate, to each take a drink of water from the watering hole, because cooperating at that point is better than being lunch, right? That is the concept of rearranging the table. That's how it looks. All right, step number 3, put a discussion plan in place that gives all parties the ability to both hear and be heard. Most of the time what I hear from folks is high degree of frustration comes from, they didn't hear me. I'm not being heard. I'm talking and I'm talking and I'm talking and I'm not being heard. Okay, well, let's create a plan that allows you to both speak and be heard. What does that look like? In most cases, it involves having a back and forth conversation. An agreement to move back and forth, to take turns. Oh, it always takes us back to our childhood, doesn't it? When we're acting like adults, we have to go back and figure out how to act like we should have been acting when we were being yelled at while we were kids. So we remember our parents' words in our minds where they said, take turns. And we create a plan where we take turns. So here's what that looks like. One person gets to speak. The other person gets to engage in active listening. Active listening. Maybe that's a term that you've heard. It's pretty common. But here's kind of how active listening looks. Number one, when we're engaging in active listening, we're listening carefully and we're noting details. We're not just listening for the 30,000-foot flyover. We're listening for details. And we're certainly not thinking about how we're going to respond while the other person's talking. I hear that a lot in marriage counseling. I try and explain my situation, but I can see it in their eyes. They're already thinking about how they're going to respond. That's what we do when we're defensive. So we got to drop those defenses. Don't be thinking about how you're going to respond to what the other person is saying yet. There'll be time for that later because you're going to get your turn. You already agreed on that. Instead, listen, noting details. Another part of it is reflecting. We use paraphrasing or summarizing. And this is where this gets made fun of a lot, where people will say, so what I hear you saying is, and it's almost like the psychiatrist, and how did that make you feel? You know, these little buzz phrases that we have, but we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna reflect and rephrase. So what I hear you saying, I'm really mad because you never give me any time. What I hear you saying is that you're frustrated that there are other things in my life that I give more time than you, and you feel like I'm shorting you on the time that you get from me. Yeah, that's what I think. That's what I'm saying. Okay, great. You've just active listened, and you've confirmed for the person who's frustrated about something that they've been heard. So they may still be frustrated that you're not giving them time, but they're not frustrated they aren't being heard anymore, okay? We're taking bites out of the frustration. Thirdly, respond thoughtfully to demonstrate understanding and to engage. So when somebody's speaking and you're listening carefully and you're sort of reflecting back, it's really great to say something like, okay, I hear that these are concerns of yours, and I want to do what I can to meet those needs that you have, to answer those concerns that you have. All right? Somehow indicate that you plan to respond in a way that demonstrates understanding. Okay? That's active listening. So speak back and forth, take turns. When it's your turn to speak, speak. Don't make it too long. No filibusters in marriage conversations. You're not trying to outlast the other person. You're just trying to be clear. And then stop. Zip your lip and let them speak. I've actually used the term zip your lip in sessions before. It's funny to see how people respond to that. But there's times where it's needed. You got to get somebody's attention to say, hey, zip it. It's their turn, right? Take turns and make it. Don't make it, when you're kids and you're fighting with a sibling maybe and your parents say, now you apologize and make up. And you're like, sorry. Well, that doesn't mean anything, right? Why? Because the parent is making them do that. In this situation, nobody's making you do anything. You're choosing to listen this way. And eventually, your spouse is going to get this, or the other person in this situation is going to get it, that you care because you're choosing to listen. You're choosing to listen carefully and process, and you're choosing to work with me to solve this. It's a big deal. Makes all the difference in the world. Put a discussion plan in place that gives the parties the ability to hear and be heard. Number 4, acknowledge and define all interests and issues of the conflict. I would note here that some issues are not interests. Sometimes there are outside incentives or duress that comes in from the outside, that there are people who are creating issues, but they don't have an interest in the argument. I remember a story one time that somebody told me where a man and a woman were planning to get married. They were engaged. And the father of the bride, while he said, look, we are behind you guys, we love you, we will do whatever you decide, but I will give you $5,000 to elope. So for the couple, they're like, cool. I mean, we're poor and going into marriage, and we're young kids, and we don't have anything yet. $5,000 would go a long way. Does that create an issue in the discussion? Sure. Does the father-in-law to be have an interest in this situation? For him, he does, but not for the two of them. So when they're discussing with each other what their wedding is going to look like, they need to learn to restrict that discussion to the two of them. Father-in-law, I mean, in our culture, typically, oftentimes we see the father of a bride or parents of the bride footing the bill for kind of the wedding and things. Maybe the groom's parents do the rehearsal dinner, something like that. You sort of share costs, and we find ways of absorbing that. Sometimes kids just pay for things themselves, right? Especially if people get married a little later on in life. So the father-in-law to be doesn't really have an interest in this. He's making a suggestion, making an offer. Doesn't have to be considered, though. So identify all of the actual interests and the issues of the conflict, but pay attention to the interests. Those are what you want. You want to just list the interest. Set aside all assumptions. Right? This is where bias comes in. We come to the table with assumptions. If you can somehow or other wrangle your mind and corral your mind and say, all right, I'm going to set aside assumptions. I'm not going to assume that this person wants the worst for me. I'm not going to assume that they hate me. I'm not going to assume that they're just trying to make life difficult for me. I'm not going to assume they're being unreasonable until I hear more. Right? Think again about the stolen groceries situation. Maybe there's an explanation, okay? I'm not going to assume anything. Setting aside assumptions. Second, ask the parties to list and rank their interests in order of importance. All right? List and rank their interests in order of importance. So what do you need in this situation? What do you want? What are you looking for? What does success in this situation look like to you? How would you define that? What are the things that you want or need? And then put those in order of importance, however you want to. Least to greatest, greatest to least, however you want to do it. I always think in terms of least to greatest, but what's the most important thing to you? I guess greatest to least I think of then, don't I? What's the most important to you? And then sequentially down the list in decreasing importance. Well, now you know not only what you want, but how badly you want them. And if you don't want them as badly, maybe there's something at the bottom of your list that you want, but it's not as important to you. Maybe that's something you might be willing to give up later on to get a deal, right? To come to an agreement or an arrangement of some kind. Okay, so make a list of the things that you want or need in order of importance. And then formulate, ask, and answer bias-free questions. Formulate, ask, and answer bias-free questions. This is really hard because most of our speech comes with some kind of bias or some indication of how we already feel about a situation, right? But try to come up with questions, not help me understand. If you were to ask, help me to understand why this thing is so important to you. That's a bias-free question. A biased question would sound like this. Why do you want something so ridiculous? Right? Clearly there's biases there, right? Or starting with a statement. Seems like you're willing to give up an awful lot to get that thing. Why? Even that. Well, a better question still has some biases to it. Try and come up with questions that actually are simple questions. Keep them as short as you can. And use them to understand what the other person really wants or needs. Ask a million questions, any and all that you can think of, whether or not they even seem helpful in the moment. Don't be annoying, but if there could be any relevance, ask a question. In addition to gaining clarity, you are seeking to enlarge the pie. This is where we're talking about enlarging the pie. There's a little story that I latched onto early on in studying conflict, and I love it because it's such a great picture of this. A mom had two daughters. The daughters were fighting over an orange. It's a weird situation. I'm like, I don't think we've ever had kids fighting over a piece of fruit, but it could happen. All right, so the two daughters are fighting over an orange. And the mom is listening to them from a different room, and pretty soon they're shouting. They're yelling at each other. I want the orange. I want the orange. You don't get, why should you get the orange? I'm older than you. Well, I'm smarter and better than you. Back and forth, all the words. And the mom finally has had enough, and she goes into the kitchen and says, in a very Solomonic way. Remember the King Solomon story, cutting the baby in half, right? The mom takes a knife and goes thump and lops the orange in half. Gives one half to one daughter, one half to the other, and says, "Now stop arguing. Get out of here." So the daughters walk away. One goes to her room, and the other one goes to the kitchen. And so the mom waits about a half hour, and then she thinks, maybe I was a little bit harsh. I don't know. Either way, they were really upset. I should go back and check on them. So she goes to the first daughter and asks how she's doing, and the daughter says, I'm all right, but I only have half an orange. I needed the whole orange. And the mom asks, well, why was that so important to you? What did you need the orange for? And her answer was, I wanted to eat the orange. I wanted to eat the orange. Like I wanted a whole orange, and now I have a half an orange, and I'm only half happy with that solution. The mom said, okay, well, next time try and work it out with your sister. Try and come up with a better plan, but she didn't have a whole lot more to say at that moment. But she did want to go check on the other sister. So she walked in to the kitchen to check on the sister who was sitting there staring at the counter with a half an orange on it, and asked how she was doing, and she said, I only have a half an orange. And so the mom asked, well, what did you need the orange for? And she said, I'm baking a cake, and I need the zest from a whole peel, from a whole orange. And I only have half one. And I don't know if I can do this. If the mom had asked the right question earlier and found that one daughter wanted the meat from inside the orange and the other one wanted the peel, there's an agreement to be had and made there, right? That's an easy one. If you ask the right questions, okay? So ask lots of questions, even if they don't seem like brilliant or necessary at the time. Ask lots of questions. Really a good idea. Okay, so that's number 4. Acknowledge and define all interests accurately in that conflict, right? Number 5, we've reached the point where we're ready, now that we understand all the interests and we've established some rapport around the table, we're working together to come up with a solution. Now let's do some option building. Option building is fun. Number 1, letter A, this should be a give and take, right? Be willing to give and take. Understand that the best thing that you can do in some cases is to be willing to give up one of those interests that's lower on your list to gain some traction. There's a pretty good chance in every situation like the orange that the thing that you want most is something that the other person doesn't want as much. And the thing they want most is something you don't want as much. And therefore, there's already an agreement there, just waiting in the wings for you, okay? Be willing to give and take when you come to the table. In so many situations, people come and they say, I will not be taken advantage of. I'm not giving an inch. And they don't. And so nothing good happens. They walk away sad and lacking. So be willing to give and take. Letter B, acknowledge and define the issues of the conflict. Once again, we're coming back and we're repeating these issues. Okay, this is where we see. These are the issues as I understand them. Take turns getting all those out on the table. Is a really good thing to do during option generation while you're coming up with ideas. Sometimes you got to be thinking outside the box when you're generating those options, and it's good to be thinking wildly and willing to share those crazy ideas. Sometimes the craziest ideas are the ones that actually end up being bringing agreement. Solutions that you didn't think could ever happen do. But if you think about it, if you come to the table and you're defensive, and you feel like you're being threatened and backed into a corner, how likely are you to come up with this idea might be crazy, but we say those things to people we trust. People aren't going to look at us like we have lobsters crawling out of our nose, right? Like, what in the world were you thinking when you suggested that? So if we've already established a trusting relationship, and we've already created an environment where we agree to brainstorm together, no idea is too crazy. Get them out on the table. They're all possibilities. See there I wrote, be willing to build on small victories. This is a really big deal. The reality is that people come to the table with big expectations and big goals, grand goals. And sometimes it's really hard to get to that goal because the person on the other side of the table is not willing to let you have it. And so you know that they're not going to let you have it. They know they don't want to let you have it. They know they want to get what they want to get. And so from the start of that disagreement, you're looking at this going, this is hopeless. This is hopeless. We're not going to ever get anywhere. But then you start to ask questions, and you start to build some options. And some of those options take advantage of those interests that are lower down on the list. And no, I can't see to giving you the whole thing that you want, but I am willing to give up that one little thing that I don't want as much. What can we do for each other? Okay, well, if you're willing to give that up, which surprises me because I didn't think we were getting anywhere, I'm willing to give up this thing that I don't want as much that you want more than I do. Okay, well, that's amazing. We just came to part of an agreement. It is an agreement in and of itself, but it's part of the whole. But now, you come to the table the next day or a week later or a month later, you already have one victory under your belt, right? You already have an agreement. And you're feeling a little bit less hopeless. Because when you came in the first time, you were telling yourself, nothing's going to happen here. We're not going to get anywhere. And now, you've already gotten somewhere. You can't say that anymore. Right? Build on those small victories. Be willing to do that. Again, letter D, think outside the box. We kind of already talked about that one. E, ask, what can I contribute? Ask this question, what can I contribute? And I love this question. I want to tell you a brief story that hammers this one home. What can I contribute is what can I add to this discussion that's not already being factored in? There's a great story that I first heard a guy by the name of William Ury. Bill Ury is on staff at Harvard now, teaches in their Center for Conflict Studies, but used to be an envoy to the Middle East for the government. Super interesting guy, and other parts of the world as well, but he spent some time in the Middle East. So he had this great story that he had heard about two sons whose father had died. And the father had left three sons. The father left the three sons 17 camels. Story from, years ago in the Middle East. Left the sons 17 camels. Well, think about that. The dad specifically said, I want the oldest son to have half the camels. I want the middle son to have 1/3 of the camels. And I want the youngest son to have 1/9 of the camels. Well, half of the camels, you can't divide 17 by 2. A third of the camels, you can't divide 17 by 3. And 1/9 of the camels, you can't divide 17 by 9. What are these guys going to do? How do they calculate what this inheritance looks like? Who gets what? So they start fighting. Well, maybe you can give me one of your camels, and then we'll be even. No, because then I'll be getting less than I'm supposed to get. Well, what if we change the ratio? No, we have to honor our father's legacy, right? We have to honor his will. So finally, they go to this old woman in the village, and they ask for her advice. They know her to be wise. They ask for her counsel, and she says this. She thinks about their problem for a moment, and she says, I don't know whether I can help you, but I can offer you something. I will let you have my camel. Okay? Well, now they have 18 camels. The son who's supposed to get half the camels, 18 divided by 2 is 9. So he gets 9 camels. The middle son, who's supposed to have 1/3 of the camels, 18 divided by 3 is 6. So he gets his camels. The youngest son, who's supposed to get 1/9 of the camels, 18 divided by 9 is 2. So he gets his camels. 9 plus 6 plus 2 is, anybody? 17. 9 plus 6 plus 2 is 17. They have one camel left over, and it goes back to the lady. Try it at home, the math works. It's freaked me out for the last 6 years, ever since I heard this. This actually works. Ask yourself what you can contribute in a situation like that. Maybe you can bring something to the table that changes the whole table, right? So ask yourself what you can contribute. Love that story. It's so fun. Begin suggesting and responding to options. Be honest. Have a back and forth exchange. If you don't ultimately solve the conflict to your liking and to the other person's liking, then you really haven't succeeded. So you have to be honest. What do you really want? What do you really need? Have a back and forth exchange. Begin suggesting and responding to options. And finally, under that item, work to show goodwill and good faith. If you make a promise, keep it. Show interest for the other person. Work to show goodwill and good faith. Finally, number 6, write out your conflict engagement plan, how you're going to ultimately resolve this thing. Whatever agreements you come to, whatever ideas you have, write those down. It's good to have those in written form. Take some time and hash them over. Number one, we use a different part of our brain when we write things down. So we think about that differently when we're writing than we do when we're speaking even. It's just a fact of how our minds work. So take the time to write them down. You'll notice things when you're writing that you maybe won't notice while you're speaking. So write those down. Write down your plan. Number 7, edit your plan until all parties can agree, until you come up with something that works for everybody. Now, partial plans are acceptable. I would say this, because as I said before, they can lay the groundwork for small successes, and small successes can be built upon. We can build on our smaller successes. So even if you have just a small success that you can achieve, take it and make note of it. Hopeless people are less likely to collaborate. This is what I was saying before. Hopeless people are less likely to collaborate. I mean, why would you collaborate? Take the time and the energy if you have no hope of getting what you want or need. This is when people give up, right? They just give up. But small successes create hope. They create hope. As I said before, you can never look at the situation again and say we can't do something positive here. You already have. So make note of those and come up with even partial plans. Even if you can't solve the whole disagreement that you're having, write down your partial plan. Number 8, determine next steps and execute them. Keep going. Keep engaging and keep following your plan until all the interests have been addressed. Whether or not you get what you want is beside the point, but address every one of those interests. They're all important. They were all important for one or both of you to come to the table and fight over. So they're important. Address all of them and keep going until you do. And number 9, lastly, I love this one. Commemorate your success or your successes. Expressing gratitude to each other, acknowledging the hard work that everybody had to do to get the job done. There's something really special about saying, I know this was really difficult. In a marriage, especially if both of you are following Jesus, my hope and prayer is that we never have to have another argument like this. This one was difficult and it got out of hand, but I'm so glad that you were willing to come and talk with me about this. And it was hard for me too to be humble and to be willing to give things up. And I didn't want to give anything up, but I'm so glad that we talked and that we worked through this together, and thank you. Thank you for working through this. I recall a story from a marriage mediation one time. A couple was divorcing, and the mediator was sitting in a room with the soon-to-be ex-husband and ex-wife. And they were basically divvying up their property. He was a successful businessman, had been for quite a few years. She was an at-home mom, worked really hard, homeschooling their kids, taking care of their family, keeping up the home where they had a lot of business-related parties and events and get-togethers. She worked really hard, and so did he. But they grew apart over a period of about 10 years. So the mediator was sitting with them at the table and watching the interplay between the two of them, and came down to this. The last item that they were fighting over was an old couch that the guy had in his dorm room in college that he had now moved to his man cave in the basement of his home. Ugly, ugly couch. Stained on the middle. The middle cushion was different than the other two cushions. Just an ugly old couch. And the mediator observed that they were fighting over this. And so the mediator said, I can't help but notice that you're fighting over this couch. It's, as an outsider looking in, if I may say, it's not a particularly new-looking couch. And the guy's like, no, it's in my dorm room. And the woman said, no, it's a hideous thing. Well, in that case, why do you want it? And the guy said, well, it's important to me because it represents a lot of history, represents a lot of good times, a lot of good memories. And I keep cleaning it, and I know I can't get the stains out of that ugly thing, but it means a lot to me. Many, many, many good experiences there. Good times with my friends were had in rooms where that couch was sitting. Just meaningful to me. And she said, "You're not getting it. You're not getting it. I'm not giving it up." And so the mediator decided, all right, I'm gonna meet with them separately and see if I can understand what's happening here. So he met with the woman first, and the woman, he said, "Help me understand this. That couch, you said it yourself. It's an ugly couch. Why are you fighting over that couch?" And she said this: "For 10 years, I worked day in, day out, day and night to keep up our home so that he could entertain people from work. As we had children, I took care of them, made sure that they were cared for, schooled them, got them around to all the extracurricular activities, Day in, day out, hour upon hour, I took care of our family and I took care of our home and created a place where he could bring people into, and be comfortable. And a lot of deals were made there. A lot of money was made there. I have value. I worked really hard, and he's never one time acknowledged what I brought to our marriage. Okay. She was clear. It wasn't the couch, right? That's what the mediator learned there. So I hear that story, and I think about some that I've seen myself, and that rings true. So the mediator then took the man aside and said, help me understand what's happening in this room. He didn't ask about the couch. He already heard about the couch. The guy explained why he wanted it. Why do you think your wife is so upset and so opposed to giving you this couch? And he said, I can't for life of me figure it out. I don't think she's ever even sat on that couch. And I never asked her to clean it because that would have been mean. So I don't understand why she'd want the couch. And the mediator asked, I keep saying I asked. I heard this mediator, as he told the story, asking the guy, was your wife a good wife? It's a great question. Was she a good wife? Well, yeah. She was amazing. Tell me why. She did everything in our home. I never had to lift a finger there. I got to be a part of all the fun things that our kids got to do. I didn't have to do any of the hard stuff for the most part. And yeah, she's amazing. I love talking with her. I love being with her. It's great. And so the mediator asked, why do you think she was so upset about this couch then? Why? I don't understand. Okay. So the mediator went on, as much as you think of her, as much as you appreciate her, did you ever tell her any of that? Did you ever share those thoughts? Did you ever thank her for the work she did? And the guy just kind of looked at the ceiling for a minute and said, guess I could have done better. Okay, time to get back in the room and talk again, right? So the mediator brings the couple back together. And right before they went in the room together, the mediator asked the guy, whispered to him, what do you think would happen if you expressed appreciation to your wife? And that was ringing in the guy's ears when they came back to the room. So they sat down at the table, and the mediator asked the question, all right, how do you want to proceed? And the guy stopped everything. He said, before we go any further, I want to say something. And his wife went like this. And the guy said, I just want to say that I have been terrible. I've been terrible at showing appreciation. I've been terrible about expressing how much I value you. I've been terrible about saying thank you and acknowledging all the hard work that you've done all these years. You've been a great wife. You've been an amazing wife, mother to our children. You've been incredible. And I just wanted to say that. I know that this is not going to go backwards. We're not going to suddenly stop this process. I get that. I feel like we're too far along for that. I get it. But I just want you to know that I think you've been amazing. And she was sitting there like this. And she went, keep your stupid couch. Right? It was never about the couch. It was never about the couch. Gratitude was really, really important. People work hard in relationships. We take them for granted. Don't do that. If you're in a conflict situation, be paying attention. Use opportunities, especially if somebody's willing to drop their arms and relax a little bit and have a conversation with you when you've been fighting. Thank them for that. That's taken effort. It's been hard. Thank them for that. Show appreciation for that. And use apologies effectively when they're appropriate. Nothing takes the wind out of an argument like a legitimate, authentic apology. It's amazing. So, all right, with that wraps up our outline. So let me just close this section out in prayer, and then we'll do a little bit of Q&A. Father, we thank you for your word, for the way that the Bible so accurately helps us to put our finger on the problem. The problem is us. Each and every one of us has desires in our heart, and we're selfish people by nature. We have a nature that is self-serving and inward-looking. Help us to be humble before you, before our spouses, before others around us. Help us to be willing to ask even the hard questions when we're in conflict with others. Help us to be inquisitive. Help us to follow the two greatest commandments, loving you with all of our mind, soul, heart, and strength, and loving our neighbor as ourselves. Help us to know what it looks like to love other people the way that we love ourselves. Help us to put effort and energy into our relationships, especially our marriages. They are gifts from you. We want to handle them responsibly. Help us to grow and learn and to follow you as we do. We love you and thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.